But
This is not a show and might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and Guest.
That's right, it's Judah and Guest. And of course, my guest, it's Wednesday. So my guest is Captain Blackburn. How you doing, Joshua?
arr.
Oh, I like
Doing
the
well, man.
Guinness shirt. Nice.
Yeah, just do something. Yeah, just got
I
out of
like
work and
Yeah, I
threw
like
some
how
old T-shirt on.
well see, this is what I wear to work. So this is where I work. And I got to design the uniform, so I said, well, if I'm designing the uniforms, I want to wear something. I picked the nice soft cotton lycra blend, or not lycra. What is it? But it's stretchy.
Yeah,
But I like you've got that old. It's I forget what they have a certain name for that kind of t-shirt. It's a canvas or something, but it's pure cotton, right? And it just
probably it's just old and beat up, and
it's
the neck is wore out and
nice. Something comfortable.
cozy.
Well, today, how was your day? I didn't even ask you. How you been?
Busier than I want to be. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those difficult things where like I'm personally am well, but sometimes I feel like I'm in the eye of the hurricane. But that's
Hmm.
cheers. Yeah.
Cheers. We want to talk about. Wow, just lost everybody. Want to talk about education and homeschooling in particular. I think it's really good. For me, it's apropos as I just got back from a meeting. I'm going to be a director this year of Classical Conversations Homeschooling Consortium.
Okay.
Let me ask you, my wife asked me, is it consortium or consortium? I've been saying consortium.
My wife and I have these types of discussions ourselves,
Yeah.
and sadly, it generally results in Google being the arbiter of who's right and who's wrong. So she'll type it in like how to pronounce, fill in the word, and
Well,
consortium or consortium. I don't know.
I see. What's funny is I typically say consortium. I hate that sort of hard ti
Hmm.
sounds real. But for some reason I've been saying consortium, consortium. But anyways, so are you guys part of a homeschooling group?
Well, so here in Tennessee, you can basically petition the government, sorts, let them know that you're going to homeschool on your own, or um, and this is I think is a route that a lot of people take in Tennessee is they find themselves under some kind of what they refer to as a covering school. So it's
Hmm.
essentially a church school that's distributed. Like we literally get like little ID cards that say we're like teachers, and the kids have ID cards that say they're students, and
It's like decentralized school.
it's like the one we're using last year and this year because they've got like a little local outpost is the Family Christian Academy, um, and they take care of all the record keeping per state laws, and then we have been doing like a once a week co-op, though this year we're kind of on the fence about like what route we're going to take. It's that time of the year where everyone starts looking at curriculums and
And
books and
a lot more
making a
people.
plan. And a lot more people are.
This year doing that. So North Carolina just came out. They're going with Plan B, which is a mix of A was everybody goes to school, C was nobody goes to school. We do it all online, and so the governor came out with Plan B. I think eventually he's going to resort to Plan C, but I think the question for me is homeschooling better than public school?
Um, is it better?
That's
Well,
just that was the clickbait title I
clickbait.
put.
Is it
Obviously, that's
better?
not. Yeah.
Is it better in what way?
Then,
better
yeah,
how?
because I put that because then you get the people that are homeschooling. They're like, yeah, let's. Is it better? You better say yeah. And then you get the people that are, you know, they like public school, and they're like, what did they say that it's
Well,
better?
I can say this. I mean,
Yeah,
look, the student teacher ratio is certainly the lowest, generally speaking, in homeschooling as
absolutely.
compared to public schools. That being said, and this is where I think sometimes it gets difficult. You know,
Mm,
like one of the typical, I think, attacks against homeschooling is, well, how are your children going to be socialized? And I'm like, you've obviously not met my children. They're fine. They're okay. They're all right. They can hang on their own. They can talk to adults. They can talk to children their own age, and they can talk to everybody in between. They're okay.
yeah,
Because guess what? If education is to prepare you for life, life does not exist in an age segregated room.
true.
It just doesn't. Uh, and generally speaking, I can pick out homeschoolers out of a crowd because they're the ones that can actually hold a conversation with an adult
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
or someone outside of their peer group. Um,
Well, it's more than that. I did a whole paper on how parents are the first social relationship of no matter what, whoever your parent is, that's your first. And actually, typically, it's your father if you have a father, is typically, or the father figure is the first social relationship because it's the first time you have other. Mom isn't other. Mom is an extension. You know, it's like it's not much different than a thumb. You know, at a certain point when you're a baby.
when you're a baby.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
so that when the baby encounters dad, that is their first social relationship. That's their first navigating other.
Typically, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's typically their first encounter with the other.
Mm-hmm. And parents. So uh, Jordan B. Peterson, he always says that if a child doesn't learn to socialize by the time they're 4, I think he says 4, then you're gonna have serious trouble. He says because if they don't learn how to how to navigate social situations, then they're gonna do things that are off-putting to children, and then parents are gonna see them as trouble, and they're gonna face a lot more isolation and less integration. And but I don't think that means, well, whether he means it or not. I don't think they need to learn how to socialize from their peers. They need to learn how to socialize from their family, and if they can do that, then they can translate those ideas and those concepts they've learned from their family to easily to a broader network of people.
They can. Yeah, no. And one of the things that I was going to say that's difficult for me sometimes is that you know I've met some really dumb homeschooled kids. And
Yeah.
going back to the question of is it better, and I think I want to qualify that in the sense that in many respects it can be better, and sometimes it's not.
That's true.
There really, I know in the last couple of years, there's been a pretty heavy critique about homeschooling by not people outside of the homeschooling community, but rather by homeschooling children themselves that are now adults. Um,
What is the critique there? I'm missing
well,
the
and I think they tend to be the poster children for what can go wrong.
homeschooling, the parents that were homeschooling their kids.
Well, this would be homeschooled children, formerly homeschooled children who are now in their 20s or maybe even early 30s, that have been rather vocal in their critique of their own education
Oh,
in
I see.
retrospect.
Okay.
So I mean, I think there's lots of opportunities in homeschooling, and there are a lot of potential pitfalls as well. That I mean, it's not all roses, and
Yeah.
just
Well,
be it'll be great, it'll be perfect.
but
Um,
if you compare the extremes, so the
mm-hmm,
best to the best, the worst to
mm-hmm,
the worst,
mm-hmm.
I feel like it's hands down homeschooling wins.
I tend to lean that way. If I didn't, I probably wouldn't.
Win
We
homeschooling.
wouldn't be homeschooling. However, I think under certain circumstances and certain families, the public school is a reasonable. It's not an unreasonable option,
No, absolutely
and
not.
and can produce very very intelligent and well adjusted and well prepared people.
Well,
Um,
private school as well.
and let us not forget about the private school.
The was it the stepchild of the situation here? Not really, but
Well, I mean,
the,
I guess when I guess I forget about private school much in the same sense that you probably do because that ain't in my budget,
yeah, yeah.
and it's
No,
generally not in the budget of most people.
well, it was in the budget of my parents. I went to a lot of private school because my parents were teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to get big time discount because they were teaching. I'm sure it probably ate into their salary as well. Uh, we are about to start
Will,
homeschooling in 2 weeks. You
great.
remember Will, don't you?
Of course, I remember. Hi, Will.
You will.
And,
We'll
and I
see.
think a lot of people are beginning to consider homeschooling as a viable option, whether it's they're dissatisfied with their local school. I'll give an interesting example: Unicoi County, Tennessee.
Okay.
No, you probably never heard of Unicoi County, Tennessee. It's a really small county on the eastern end, hop, skip, and a jump from Asheville. About a quarter of the school age children in Unicoi County are homeschooled.
Wow. A quarter. That's huge.
A quarter.
So, do they have more homeschoolers than private schoolers? Probably, right?
That's a good question. I'm not very familiar
That's
with
that's a
the private
lot.
school. No, it's enough that it's bothersome to the public school because that's a lot of funding. When your funding is driven by population, like
But
the
don't.
numbers of children in the school.
Oh, right, right. Attendance. Yeah.
Yeah, enrollments.
Yeah. Enrollment. That's the right word.
So
But homeschooling parents still pay taxes,
yes, they do.
and
And some of that money, and that's the difficult thing. I mean, some of that state money, but also a good chunk of it's federal.
Mhm.
So it's
well,
redistribution of wealth from various parts of the country and potentially corporations. So
yeah. I sent around, or I posted the meme recently on Facebook. It was somebody, I forget who it was, on Twitter, who said that on average each student gets about 15,000 a year allocated for their education. Now that COVID is ruining that, why don't teachers find 10 students, 10 of
mm-hmm.
those students start their own little micro school
Mm-hmm.
and make 1,500 a year. And I got some pushback. One being the support services, uh, and to me, being a support service for public school for a while, I'll tell you that we weren't. I mean, you take 50,000 of that 150,000 and give it to a person who you trust to who has a counseling degree or has the sort of acumen that you need for support,
Mm-hmm.
and you're paying them probably double or close to double what they would have made at the public school. And so I said
Listen,
that 150 divides up pretty easy.
yeah.
And then the other pushback I got was that, which is, I think it's fair, that, oh yeah, well, what that sort of seems callous towards towards minority groups and the underprivileged, those that are in the socioeconomic uh, level that they can't afford paying for that. But my point was, look, this we're not talking about people paying that 15,000.
Yeah.
The government's paying that. I said I will take
It's
half of that,
sure.
and the government can save $7,000. Of course, it's the average is more like the real average is more like 12,000. I think in
Well, I mean,
Chicago.
I've got 4 children. If they want to send those checks to me, I'll be more than happy to stay at home and educate my children for 48 grand a year. Um,
That's a good point.
you
Yeah.
know, I think my struggle is just in general, and because um, it's sort of re-envisioning the purpose and goal, and obviously we're gonna land on very similar pages if you're working with classical conversations.
Yeah.
You know, what's the ultimate purpose and goal of education? Because even just from a purely intellectual perspective, I was at lunch a couple weeks ago with my wife's brother-in-law, and there where all of our families were together, and we were discussing grammar.
Mm.
And I um, just had to remark that I encounter rather awful grammar, and use of the use and abuse of the English language. Working in the counseling field, and I work entirely with people who have at least a master's degree. Um, so
Hmm.
I tend to lean towards like, let us learn how to think well,
Yeah.
write well, speak well, analyze,
And
synthesize
teach well.
information, problem solve, teach. Let's apply some logic to a situation.
Well, and Will says it's hard to imagine a high school teacher micro teaching 10 students if they're certified, say, in history. What about math, science, etc.?
Sure.
You might think that. Well, and I would agree. That's sort of the problem, though, I feel like, Will. I think that's sort of the problem. Uh, I have to teach Latin, science, math, English, two others, geography, and I forget. And as homeschool teachers, so my wife, the thing she's been saying is, in a loving way, saying, well, it's time for parents to take charge of their children's education, and that might sound basic, but when you think about it, parents have been the majority of American parents have been outsourcing their children's education completely
Mhm.
for years.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's going back to the question of better. That's my struggle. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's room for delegation. Like for instance, my oldest daughter, we've got a neighbor who's a close friend who's an English professor, and we were discussing what she wanted to work on last year, and she's like, well, I'd like to study poetry, and it's like, well, you're going to Amy's house for an hour once a week,
Mm-hmm.
because she can teach you poetry better than I can. However, but I think this
Mm.
is like the difference, right? Between just simply blind faith, like here's my child, go teach them. Um, it, it, to me, it just seems responsible to be an informed consumer. If you're delegating
Mm-hmm.
of education, just as much as I'd want to be a conformed consumer of medical services, legal services, any kind of professional service.
Yeah.
Yes, you recognize that you don't know it all. That's why you're hiring a professional. On the other hand, it behooves you to know just a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we do research. Uh, so Will says, not that I don't think it's a good idea. I love it. And I hear you, Will. I think that's one of my frustrations with the system the way it is that we have all these compartmentalized um,
It's disintegrated.
applications. Yeah. Say more about that.
Well, it's disintegrated. It's
Yeah.
compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Um, it,
It's not integrated
it's
yet.
not integrated, and there are always and there's always attempts towards that. But the reality is, let's just be honest, in a pluralistic society, we don't have a unified field of vision, a unified vision of knowledge.
Hmm.
It's always going to be conditioned upon some particular worldview. It's just the way it is. We can beat around the bush, but that's just going to happen. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And see, the thing is, for me, is you said if I didn't believe that there were things that were a lot better about homeschooling, I wouldn't send my kids to. I wouldn't be homeschooling them. I think I still would homeschool them, even if I thought it was they would get a they wouldn't get as good of an education, because the other thing that I don't like is I feel like that at the most vulnerable age
Mm.
we are, you talk about being an informed consumer, we're sending them into I don't know what. Now I'm not saying it's all bad,
Well,
but I'm
true.
saying we're not allowed in there. I guess we are allowed in there, but
No,
we're not.
I can tell you from no, the likely, yeah, like the at least when I grew up in public school, like the idea of like parents coming in for lunch. I mean, we live in a different world. So yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You're depending upon, you know, the personal report of your child of what's going on in the classroom. Yeah, but I think to a certain degree that begs an interesting question. Like, so I'll agree with you in the sense that to a certain age, like the family is probably the most productive and efficient context for education.
Mhm.
But yet, you and I both went to college, right? So that's outside of the family. So I mean, I'm with you, and I'm
Mhm.
just wondering, like your thoughts on like, well, where is there a place or time like to where the school could be an appropriate context for education? Just curious.
Yeah, let's talk about that real quick though. What homeschool students have the greatest potential to learn is how to take ownership of their education. Yes, since parents don't feel like experts, we'll be seeking out opportunities with them. Absolutely. So in this meeting today with a parent that was worried, hey Aunt Joe, how you doing? Love you. Um, a parent was worried about disparities in the class and such,
Mm-hmm.
and I was honest. I said, listen, my approach is a lot less didactic than others. I tend to be much more. I play dumb, and sometimes I'm not playing.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was like, tell me about this. What did you? What? And it's to me, it's about Socratic pulling out of the information,
Mm-hmm.
making things interesting. Because if I'm just talking the whole time, and that's, I think Becca's 100% right about that. When you have teachers, experts, just
Mm-hmm.
in church or in school, just saying da 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 da. This is memorize this. Here's information. Put this in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I I think that's what they have to do when they have 20 kids in the classroom.
It is. No, I'm with you. I tend to lean more towards a Socratic method and much more collaborative. I even do that when I'm onboarding clinicians, at work. Because
Yeah.
I just assume like you already know a lot of things, so let's start with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I, yeah, homeschooling. That's the fun thing I think though about homeschooling is there's a lot of flexibility there to meet the particular needs of children, and that's not necessarily available in a public school. I mean, I'll just be honest. That was my experience.
You went
Uh,
to public school.
I did. You're second generation homeschool. Well, no, you went to some private school, but some homeschool, right? So,
Right. I was homeschooled until I was I think it was fifth grade. I think fifth and sixth I did.
mm,
No, fourth, fifth. No, fifth and sixth I did. I started. That was my first private school I went to, and my dad sat down with me. I hadn't done any math up until until fifth grade. Barely any. Dad sat down with me for a day and went over every math concept
yeah,
I needed to know. And I wasn't completely ready, but you know what? Saxon math got me there. um, but I want to talk about this idea is so college we go
hmm
away. I just got in a discussion with my dad. I wasn't an argument because I wasn't necessarily disagreeing with him. But I was bringing up, he said the biblical idea of education, and we weren't talking about education as much as sending your children out away,
Hmm.
that a child goes away. He said if you look at the Bible, you're hard pressed to find a good example of any kind of mandate, or any kind of, anything, um, any example or
Hmm.
mandate of it. And I brought up some things, but it was true. Everything I brought up, he sort of shot down.
Yeah.
Most biblical titans, even because I was like, well, Abraham took off and went seeking adventure. He said no, he brought his father with him, and his
Oh,
father
there's
died.
certainly, yeah, there's certainly a lot of. Well, let's just be honest. I mean, the scriptures describe a collectivist culture, um,
Hmm.
which should make us stop and reevaluate things. But um, I yes, I would agree with your father to a certain degree. I wonder about Paul's studies with Gamaliel. Um, it,
Hmm.
and even who knows exactly. And this is speaking historically, not necessarily from the pages of sacred scripture. Um, what was going on for 3 years between Christ and the apostles? Now, obviously, and this is, I think, the difference. Like at some point, a child is no longer a child. They might be a young adult,
Hmm.
but they're not a child.
Hmm.
If the Jewish culture bar mitzvahs a young man at 13, like where I guess it's what I'm wondering out loud is like where becomes an appropriately developmental age to start to ease out of your family. And when I say ease out, I mean kind of get out of the world a little bit.
What is it? What is the age for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's one of those things that I don't think there's a set obvious line. I think it may be different for each person, but I think that's part of parenting is deciding where
Mm-hmm.
that line
Oh,
is.
sure.
Uh,
I mean, that's the thing. I guess historically, most. I mean, they were young men, at least in the Renaissance, that were going to college at 13, 14, 15, 16.
yeah,
Um,
and memorizing tons. I mean, just becoming lawyers by the time they were 20.
yeah.
Sam
Oh,
says,
absolutely.
"Do you remember Sam? Sam Reese?
I'm getting old. My memory is fuzzy. I'm sorry, Sam.
If you
Forgive
saw
me.
him, you can't see him very well in that picture. All right,
I
Sam.
can't see Sam in that picture. I see a
He
podium, maybe even a lectern.
he's a preacher. We need to have Sam on. Will says the main reason we are homeschooling is you're wanting to invest in our sons. Yeah, that's what we're
Very
talking
good.
about. Abraham was called out of his father's house, but he brought his father. I said the same thing to my dad, but my dad pointed out he brought his father with him. He may have been called out of the physical house, but
Sure.
he brought his family with him. Roman society was functionally illiterate, and education was reserved for upper class, powerful. They maintained power through education. That's a good point. And I would
I,
say that it's not dissimilar now. Not necessarily through the power of education, but through the power of indoctrination.
well, I mean, and
Maybe.
let's just talk about a literate class. I mean, so again, you're doing classical conversation, so I'm going to say that you probably have some buy-in to like a classical model,
Yeah.
um, which is ultimately going to be founded in the liberal arts, the literate arts. This is the reality. If you can read well, think well, speak and write well, you're a free person. And frankly, I don't think I would agree historically with the notion that that Roman society, or even for that matter, ancient Greek society, was a predominantly illiterate um, society. That I don't think that bears historical scrutiny, frankly.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. I don't know.
uh,
Could be. But you're saying no.
I'll make that claim without footnotes. How about that?
Okay.
Um, that being said,
Yeah.
and I say that in the sense that it's kind of like, well, there's like it was an illiterate society. Yeah, maybe about as illiterate as we are now.
Well, and we're pretty illiterate.
Yeah, I mean we really are. Um, uh, and by that I mean not. It's a question of ability. To read, to comprehend, to understand, to have a broad of enough knowledge base to be able to comprehend how what you read sits within a greater context. I would, me, I'm a bibliophile, so yeah. My what qualifies as literate for me might be different for other people. Like, I have the ability to read. Well, is that really literate? Like I can read is different than well read.
And see, I am much less. Well, I'm definitely not a bibliophile, and my wife is, but I am not. I am much more illiterate than you, and I always have been. I think it's sort of been the dance, I show you some of the street skills. No, but I agree with you. I say that we are an illiterate society, not excluding myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I become someone who derives information from titles rather than reading through things, the TLDR has become me.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Rachel Hanscom, do you remember her? That's Will's. So she's with
I do.
Ray now.
I see this the tiny. I do remember Rachel.
Yeah, she's
Hi,
right
Rachel.
there. It says hi, Judah, Josh. Where's the hat? Remember you had the fedora? You don't remember the fedora?
Did I have a fedora at that time? I finally have another one.
Oh.
I'll wear it sometime.
Okay.
I don't have that
gotta wear it.
fedora. In fact, I was just talking to my children here last night, like items that I own that are reasonably old. Now, you may remember this. I had a pair of sandals that I would wear rather frequently.
Yes, I do.
They were made by Timberland, and they probably lasted 15 years.
Wow.
Like I had to throw them away about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
So
they
3 or 4 or
lasted a
5
long
years
time.
ago.
I'm serious, man. They lasted that long.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got a couple of Bibles that date from that era of my life at Tacoma. I don't have a fedora, sadly, from that era. But no, what brought it up was a chessboard that I have from when I was a child, and my children have been requesting.
They play
lessons.
chess, huh?
Well, they're learning.
Learning.
Yeah, to say that they play chess would be stretching it.
Well, my kids play. I could say at least 2 of them are pretty good.
Yeah.
For their age. And the other day, I think my son beat my mom. So just that.
That's pretty good.
But and Anna, she's sharp. I've been teaching them I used to teach chess.
I was about to say that you actually taught chess.
That's when I'm right now, I've been filling out things to say I'm doing a little ad to do, because this is the other thing, is that we are at a turning point in our society, and teacher skills. I've been thinking so much about what you said about our craft, and I have to say, and it helped me realize that discussion we had. My craft, I think counseling is part of my craft, but teaching is something is a craft that I wish I had cultivated a lot more earlier. But like you said, the most effective time of a teacher's life, I have not reached that age yet, right? I am still.
You've got time to develop it, right?
My basketball skills not the best, but teaching,
I'm with you.
I'm still getting better.
I won't be developing my basketball skills. And I love the word craft. It's like
I'm glad you introduced me.
I keep tabs on handcrafts, and I've always had a love for American history. And so one of the things that I really enjoy kind of keeping tabs on are hobby craftsmen that are flintlock rifle builders.
Oh, interesting.
And like teaching, I mean, you run across these people that start building rifles, reproduction, flintlock shotguns and rifles, that start off as hobby builders and often they may end up becoming professionals. Like they literally quit their job so they can build guns full time because they just simply develop their craft. And it reminds me that no matter where you are in life, you can learn something new. In fact, like, here locally, there's a guy down at the YMCA apparently who didn't start lifting weights until his 60s and now like wins all kinds of awards. Yeah, for real.
Wow.
In some kind of, old guy weightlifting competition. It's never too soon to start to develop and hone your craft. I mean, it's just in that where you started, when you're in your 20s may not be where you're at when you're in your 50s, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
That's you don't know how freeing that discussion was for me the other night. I think you opened up you basically, that was the gist of what you were saying, about retirement. It really wasn't about retirement. It was about you're never too old to start honing a craft.
Absolutely.
And what you did when you're 20 doesn't have to be what you do when you're 60, 70.
It does not.
And that's okay. And I think, so as I'm making ads for they have newspapers here. I guess they have them everywhere, but people actually read them here. Or my dad does. I think that's.
Well, you actually guys, you probably have mullets to rep, with the newspaper.
That's
being
right.
On the coast.
We have
you have real live mullet.
Yeah,
not the hand. The hair.
Right. We
the
do.
Fish.
We have the mullet fish outside jumping right now, and when I was making my ad and listing the things that I can teach, I thought chess. I can teach how to build websites to kids. I've taught the class before, and I thought about the class I'm teaching now, and I thought, wow, I forgot that I've led classes. I've done this, okay. So the reason I'm bringing it up is because we already discussed it. I realizing that I have a craft, but it made me think. Oh, that's where I was going, with the shift in society to where now people are realizing, COVID has helped us realize some pretty fundamental things about life. One, that the structures of society are not as strong. They're more fragile than we had once assumed or taken
they
for granted.
I want to shift you a little bit, give me something. They are more fragile, but I might counter that and say that at the same time, it's also revealed that we're much more flexible than we realized. And like there are industries where everyone said we could never do that from home. We could never do that online. And then when push came to shove, they're like, oh, wow, we can. And in fact, we might even be able to do it better.
Yeah.
Especially within a knowledge economy, right? I mean, while we're talking about education, when, this hit, one of the things that, I manage an office of counselors there in Knoxville, and they had a lot of UT students, and there was a big question, that kind of got circulated around, and I still think it's an open question of what, in the long run, like, what is this going to do to college education? When so much, going back to like that 15K you were talking about, so much money gets sucked up in the brick and mortar in administration. If what would happen if it became decentralized? What would happen if it became
Where would that money go?
If it became more economically efficient? COVID has been crazy. Like because I'm a geek, so for instance, somebody had shared on Facebook. It was the University of Kentucky Press.
Yeah.
Had opened up their online catalog and was allowing free downloads of PDFs of all kinds of books So click, 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 save, 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 share, 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 share. Um,
Yeah.
but that's the that's information, that's knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, that gosh, when I've always been a geek, but in my younger geek years, at the beginning of the dawn of the internet, to find a lot of those things, you had to pack yourself into a car and go to a university library.
Yeah.
And now we have JSTOR. So I mean, it's just
Have what?
JSTOR. There's online
Oh.
um, services that catalog and give you access to academic journals. Those types of things. Oh no, I lost my glass.
Uh-oh. Yeah, well, again, I hate to go back. I always go back to Jordan Peterson. I'm sorry, he's one of my favorite. I call him a prophet. He's a prophet in our time. But
The prophet,
he
JP the prophet.
JBP the prophet. He had a whole discussion about how modern education, the way higher education cannot survive the way it is now, and this was 2 years ago.
Sure.
And so he started working on, and he's still working. And obviously, right now, it's probably getting a boost. His personal issues aside, but he started working on a collection of so starting an online school that gives you the best. It rewards the best. I forget what he talked about, but it rewards the best class. The best presentation of each subject,
Mm-hmm.
every subject. He said there shouldn't be a subject that we don't have
The best.
the best
The best
presentation.
lecture, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fair. And if and here's the thing that I think a lot of people that aren't familiar with Dr. Peterson, I'll call him Dr. Peterson. How about that?
Okay.
He's just not some guy that rose to the stage just simply because he was crying out about the abuse of language. But years before that, he was a hardcore academic.
Oh yeah.
Just do a Google search and see where he shows up in print.
Harvard.
And we're not talking about just his books, but yeah. I mean, the journal are. I mean, yeah. There's
He's read
stuff.
everything too. You
yeah.
can't name a book that he hasn't read.
Oh, he's a brilliant man. Brilliant man.
Yeah. But so to get back to what we're talking about is
the homeschool.
Homeschool. Is it really? So my wife pointed out that really isn't. When people talk about COVID and homeschool, they're not really talking about homeschool, because homeschool is an ethos, is a culture, and doing school online from home, and that's something else. That's a different thing, and people saw how
that's school at
different
home.
that is. Yeah, that's school
right. I mean,
home.
I think of that as school at home, and I don't know. I struggle. I shouldn't say I struggle. I know when I hear about homeschooling, I think of it as a broad umbrella, because underneath that umbrella there are different categories of what I would say are particular ethnicities, almost an ethos. Because you've got classical education, and just off to the side of that you have Charlotte Mace and inspired education, and then you've got the unschoolers, and then and on and on and on and on and on we go. However, I think there is a central commitment to the place where education happens, I guess I lean more towards the term context, because it's about preparation for life. Mm-hmm. And if learning is the culture in your home, then your children are prepared to learn for life. And that goes back to and if they're in their 40s, they can learn a new craft because they know how to learn.
Yeah.
They know how to pick a subject and dive deep and practice and struggle and find the resources they need to find. That's just something that I know, to me is a culture. It is an ethos. I mean, it's that to me is the biggest skill I want my children to learn is the love of learning. And if I figure if they get that, it's all good.
And it goes back to what Becca was saying. I really think that was wise to point that out, that it comes
Mm-hmm.
down to a child beginning to learn how to take responsibility for their own education. And I think that's the biggest damage, the most violence that a
Mm.
public school has done to learning has been that we don't teach kids how to learn. We teach them facts and information.
It
And
and this is I will digress. And I think yes, the system can sometimes pull away from that, but I mean, it all
you learned how to learn, and you went to public school, all right?
yeah, and what I was going to say is it just depends on the teacher. Again, this is going to go back to relationships and um, yeah, even the teachers in hindsight that at the time I didn't like, I reverence them. I'll you know
Mm.
in the sense of like they really some of them I have an English teacher, my freshman English teacher in particular in mind, who tried really hard to get me to do right.
Mm.
The reality was, um, 13, 14-year-old me was not ready to do right. I didn't start, the things that she wanted us to read, I started reading in my 20s. Um,
Mm.
but in hindsight, I look back and go, Miss Yentz was right and I was wrong.
Yeah.
But that leaves a deep impression too. Like even, I had a seventh grade history teacher, Mr. Buttermore,
Mm.
um, you know, who, yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I can remember the teachers that helped me learn how to learn. I can't remember the other ones to save my life. You put a gun
Yeah.
to my head. And I'm like, who was your, seventh grade biology teacher? I don't know. I can't remember that guy's name. Because
Well,
I'm old and
that
my
I
memory
think
is just sketchy.
I think that is profound because it comes down to relationship, and like most
It,
things,
like everything.
like everything, right? And it's true that, and obviously, it's much easier to develop a relationship with your own children in your own home, and
it,
but like you said, not just your own children, but
it,
people in the community.
it can,
Uh,
and I think that people in the community part is important because even Jesus says that it's a prophet has no honor in his own country, and sometimes that happens at home.
yeah,
Right? I mean, let's just yeah,
yeah.
Mama and Papa said this, but I just need to hear it from the neighbor.
I I I developed a whole business model off of that, being a therapeutic mentor.
Yeah, yeah,
My biggest the philosophy I built it on was therapeutic mentoring is being someone other than mom, an adult other than mom and dad, to support what mom and dad say, and I think that's super important. And there are adults in there obviously are, and there are a lot of them,
hmm
adults in public education that
there
love
are,
these kids. They love them and they develop relationships. The
and they're outstanding
difficulty,
educators, but the system
yeah,
works against them.
the system works against them, and those people are typically not well. They if they don't play the game as well as do that, then they're not rewarded, and a lot of the reward just goes to paying your dues, which is not synthetic with building relationships necessarily, uh, because when you're sitting there in front of 20, something from 15 to 20 kids, the idea of building a deep and nurturing relationship with each one of them is overwhelming.
It's not possible.
It's not possible, and I think the difficulty is the ones that get rewarded, the ones that pay their dues and make it, to the 10-year mark. they've learned how to just kind of do the thing and put the stuff, because if you get involved with the kids, then it's,
It,
extra taxing and
yeah, that's why I'm going to fall back and say that's not my. I don't have. I can't speak to that. It's not my lived experience, other than what I've heard from teachers. Other that the system works against you at times. Yeah, so I'm going to go back to homeschooling equals most optimum parent, like teacher student ratio.
I think that's clever.
and
That's
and that
wise.
can overcome a lot of challenges. And the name of the comment previously about not being an expert. Um, I'm blanking on the first name. Becca, thank you,
Becca,
Becca.
what
Shout out to Becca.
homeschool students have the greatest potential to learn is how to take ownership of their own, or their education.
And
So
that's a lifelong journey, right? Taking ownership of your
yeah,
own education. But I think
absolutely.
one of the things, if anyone's listening to this, that I think it's really important is you don't have to be an expert, because I think that can often
That's what
be
she's saying. Yeah.
an yeah, that belief that you have to be an expert, like I have to be a credentialed history teacher to teach history, is often a wall rather than a door to educating your children. Well, I can't do it because I'm not an expert. Well, you don't have to be an expert.
Right. Yeah.
You don't.
No. And if that's something somebody can take away, I think that's everything. That's the most important thing to take away from this, is that you don't have to be an expert. The most important thing is to develop a relationship, not just with you and the student, but the student and the love of information, the love of learning.
Mm-hmm. The love of truth, in the pursuit. Yeah, yeah, we'll get classical, in the sense of we really are ultimately, if we're doing things well, pursuing truth and beauty and goodness, right?
Yeah.
There is now, and I'll swing back around to this notion that I think that is one of the difficult things about public education is there isn't an honest, and I'll use this term, an honest, unified vision of knowledge. Um,
Say more.
in a pluralist society, right? So I mean, all of that information is going to be, you know, unified through a worldview, and
Mm.
the reality is that's going to have a religious content to it. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be metaphysical in nature. Um, you're going to have to deal with those types of questions and presuppositions. Um,
Can,
and
can you get to truth without religion?
you can get to true things. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Atheists. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Uh,
not the
uh,
important truth.
well, there are some important truths. I mean, like gravity and taxes.
What
Yes,
do we know about gravity?
it works. I can tell you what happens if you,
I see what you're saying, though. I agree.
yeah,
I don't.
yeah.
I don't want to be
But
obtuse.
ultimately, I mean, that's all going to be ordered, through a worldview. I mean,
Yeah.
there's gonna be presuppositions about, yeah.
Well, and that's why it is extremely important to me that if it's not me and my wife or my father or my mother or my brother, if it's not family, that it's a community. It's someone who's part of my
It
community. It's
Yeah, and well, and what I was going to follow back up on though
oh,
about
sorry.
not being an expert is there is a moral component, right? There's a character development component
Yeah.
to education. Um, that often gets left out. Like the assumption in public education is that's left at home, as opposed to it's intrinsic to education in and of itself.
Hmm. You're here to learn the facts, not to
Well,
learn how to
yeah, but
live,
it's not just
how
the
you're going to live.
facts, but I mean, like, think about your experience reading literature, or like yeah, even something as simple as Aesop's fables. these have a moral component. These have a character development component.
Mm.
Even the act of learning sometimes is character, building as far as patience and perseverance,
Yeah.
frustration tolerance, the ability, humility, right? The
Yeah.
ability to ask for help, um, to say, I don't know.
Mm.
That's a huge part of what we're doing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why you get some parents, some homeschoolers that they lack because it is important. I think there are a lot of people that don't understand. Just generally, people don't understand the need for a holistic approach to community and living. That includes. It's not just that they didn't learn how to socialize. It's that they were never taught the importance of integrating. Like getting back to the word of integrating in a community, whether that be the family
Mhm.
or a broader community, in general. It becomes solipsistic, and those are the families that I've
Well,
seen.
yes, I hear you. Yeah, that are entirely over, they're enmeshed. They, yeah, um,
Yeah.
um, yeah. No,
Okay,
I know of cases of which you speak.
and we don't want to sit in the seat of scornful. So what the
No,
last
no,
I
but
do.
it's a temptation, right? It's a dangerous temptation
Mhm.
to just fall in on yourself and not be a little bit more open to trust. Um, uh, Again, I think that has more with morals and virtue and character development than pure
Yeah,
information, right? I mean, like there's an aspect of humility there, um, that reaches out.
yeah, absolutely. And that's something that the parents have to learn before they can teach the kids. Uh, the
Yeah,
last thing, the last thing is so often what I hear a critique of homeschooling, but I think more a support in support of public education is the missionary aspect of it.
uh-huh.
Children, the children and parents creating relationships in their community. That and so going back to the idea of the community, it's
Yeah,
a perfect opportunity or perfect. I've heard it's the perfect context to create those
it's
those
a context.
connections. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you shy away from saying it's obviously it's not the perfect, but go further. I
Well, I
feel
mean,
like.
no, and I get it. I mean, to a certain degree, you want to meet people where they are, right?
Mhm.
Um, and you've got the PTA meetings, and there in intramural there's sports, and there's a place where people mingle.
Mhm.
Um, to me, I think we get lost in the discussion by not asking the first question of like, what's the purpose of education? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah, that's
As far as, and in particular, you know, with your own children. Um, I'm not sure if the Great Commission calls people to have their children indoctrinated in a way that's contrary to a biblical or historically Christian worldview. In order to reach people that aren't Christians, because you can just as easily meet these people in all sorts of other contexts and invite them over for supper,
yeah,
which is a great context for getting to know people and being able to be a light.
yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it gets too close to the idea. I don't want to say, you know,
I've heard this critique before, but I've never.
well, it gets too close to the idea of fishing. I'll say fishing, fishmongering. The
Yeah, but I'm not
children.
using my kids for bait.
Exactly. Well, that's what's a
No.
little repugnant about it to me
I,
is
I,
when
I
people bring that up. I get this.
yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
don't want to go fishing with my kids.
No. Well, I like fishing with my kids, but again, they're not
Fishing
bait
with my kids as bait,
with your kids.
or even as yeah. So, um, I'd rather. Uh, I, I just like you said. There's other ways, lots of other ways to
Lots of other ways.
encounter parents and
And yeah, and just dream with me. Like, what happens in a world where things are a little bit more decentralized as opposed to
because
centralized? Like
we're looking at it, or we're going
well,
to start looking
you and
at
I
it.
live in it. It I don't know. I think there's just lots of opportunities there, and that's just a lazy critique. Of course, I think it's a lazy form of evangelism too, but whatever. Um,
Yeah,
I'm just
I
gonna
think it is.
that's my personal opinion.
I think it is. I don't think it, but see, I don't think it comes from people. I mean, just thinking about who said it to me, I don't think it comes from people that are lazy, in as much as
Well,
they want.
that's fair.
No,
Yeah, as
but what
far
I'm
as
saying, they want to. They are so on fire for evangelism that they want to use every opportunity
oh sure,
and so but then again I
yeah,
cringe
like
at the
like
idea.
people that work in Young Life, I would never call any of them lazy. They're it's just as an example of people that are trying to meet young people where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that we confuse the purpose and goal of educating our children with evangelism.
And I think we're getting a little too myopic in the sense that we need to play the long game. Think I for me, I think of how much more we can affect the world by
Oh,
properly equipping our children.
mhm.
Um, and and I don't know. Look, you were properly. I mean, you were equipped enough. You're where you got to where you are, and I did through private school. This isn't about judging other people. To me, this is about why I made my decision and why you
Yeah,
made yours.
yeah.
And I think people, I think I have something good to say about it, and I hold to my perspective, and I think they should hold to it too, or else I wouldn't hold to it. Um, but everybody has to make their own decision, and
Absolutely.
has their own row to plow. No, their own till, their own hoe to till. I can't remember.
Your own row to hoe.
Your own row to hoe.
Yeah, you got to hoe the corn now. Got to
Well,
chop the weeds down.
I actually think this has been one of my favorite discussions, and I
It was
appreciate
fun.
you. That you need to come up with a topic more often, Josh Black.
Okay,
That's good.
maybe we'll get really specific as opposed to let's talk about homeschool.
Okay. Hey.
I don't know. We'll see.
Oh wait, before we go, we have a comment. Oh, we got a couple. Oh, mercy.
Oh, goodness.
Will's been watching. Oh yeah, we already said that. He said pre-COVID, argument against homeschooling children would not. They don't develop their social skills during COVID. Yay, homeschooling. Yeah,
Yeah.
I posted a meme of a kid like sipping some tea, like, oh, what was that you said about or watching public school redefine socialization.
Yeah. Well, we could go on for about
Yeah,
an hour just talking about the topic of socialization.
absolutely. Hey guys, great seeing you and thanks for sharing. Gotta go. Put the sons to bed.
And
Finish
finished
up
up
stuff
around the
around
house.
the house.
Good to see you,
More
Will.
power. Yeah, more power to you,
Rachel,
brother.
y'all be good.
Yeah. And everybody else, thank you, Michael and Joe, Aunt Joe. Oh, I forgot Aunt Joe posted. Shameless plug, Judah. I am in awe of you, and you're my nephew, and your wife is
Your
so
wife
smart.
is so smart.
I have to say, my wife is the brains of the operation. A lot of what
The better half.
I'm regurgitating a lot of what she said. So, how is God given Earth. Oh, thank you so much. And I probably shouldn't have showed that because
It depends. I think it's all about how you read that. Yeah, it's like, hell on God's earth, did you ever?
Oh, I love you, Joe. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Becca. Thank you for everybody. Sam, thank you. Michael is always showing up, and appreciate you guys. Will, all of you guys. I already mentioned you. So, and thank you, Josh. We will see everybody next week, hopefully.
Y'all have a good week.
Goodbye.